A Great Argead Saga Alexine, Alexander the Great. Volume 2, Leonnatus, The Sacred Band. By Macaulay Naki. Episode 10, Lion's Education. Mid-November, the Private Lyceum. The evening was utterly still, the cool night air thick with the sweet, heavy scent of blooming jasmine drifting from the courtyard and the distant rhythmic chanting of the hoplites drilling in the lower barracks. Inside the candlelit, scroll-lined library of the Cadmea, young Prince Philip sat seated around a low, polished wood table, flanked closely by his steadfast companions, Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and Amyntor. Across from them sat the two greatest commanders in the Hellenic world, the fiery, intense Pelopidas and the contemplative, profoundly philosophical Epaminondas. They were not discussing the optimal length of an ashwood spear or the technical angle of a bronze shield wall tonight. They were discussing something far rarer and more elusive, the soul of the soldier, the invisible, unbreakable bond of loyalty that made the Sacred Band the most feared military unit in the civilized world. Antigonus rested his chin on his knuckles, his sharp eyes darting between Pelopidas and Epaminondas. They keep peeling back the layers, Antigonus thought inwardly, a deep fascination stirring beneath his cynicism. First it was geometry, then leverage, and now they're dissecting the human heart. You have seen our drills on the parade ground, Philip, Pelopidas said, leaning forward into the amber lamplight, his dark eyes bright with an almost religious, burning intensity. You have watched how 300 men move as one single organism. But do not make the fatal mistake of mistaking the mechanical movement for the actual cause. An ordinary mercenary will fight for gold or plunder. He might even fight out of fear for an absolute king. But a man will only willingly die for the specific comrade standing to his left. Peithon swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to Leonnatus. For the man to your left, Peithon repeated silently in his own mind, recalling the chaotic, terrifying charges of the northern tribes. Back home, we fight for our own glory. If the battle turns bad, everyone looks out for their own skin. Epaminondas, who had been quietly, methodically tracing a complex geometric proof on a wax tablet with a bronze stylus, looked up. His expression was calm, his voice soft yet carrying the immense, sobering weight of a statesman who viewed warfare as a tragic, necessary instrument of high statecraft. Pelopidas speaks eloquently of the heart, but I speak of the polis, Epaminondas added, his gaze sweeping over Philip and his 4 young companions. The Sacred Band is not merely a specialized unit of close friends. It is a sacred community of the utterly committed. We deliberately chose 300 because that is the absolute limit of the number of souls who can truly know one another's names, their deepest fears, their flaws, and their families. When a soldier looks at his neighbor in the press of battle, he does not see a stranger's shield. He sees his own honor, his own life, and his own soul reflected. Leonnatus clenched his jaw, a profound shiver running down his spine. The engineer trusts like a blacksmith tempers steel, Leonnatus thought, his mind racing. That's why they don't break. You aren't just abandoning a formation, you're murdering your brother in arms. Philip looked back and forth between the 2 legendary generals, his young, brilliant mind absorbing a truth that was infinitely more powerful and dangerous than any physical secret weapon or tactical playbook. So the phalanx is not just a formation of bronze and iron, Philip whispered, his voice hushed with the weight of realization. It is a formation of absolute, inescapable trust. Precisely, Epaminondas said, a slight approving smile touching the corners of his lips. A mercenary company breaks and flees the moment the tactical odds turn against them. But a man of the Sacred Band cannot and will not flee, for to do so is to abandon the only person in the entire world who truly knows him. We have built an army that literally cannot be broken by steel, because to break the line is to break a sacred living vow. Amyntor narrowed his eyes, his analytical mind dissecting the political mechanics of the philosophy. Its absolute psychological conditioning, Amyntor analyzed coldly within his own thoughts. They bind men together so tightly that cowardice becomes physically impossible. Philip leaned back against the cushions, the flickering shadows of the candlelit library dancing in his wide eyes. He thought instantly of his older brothers back in Pella, of the constant assassinations, and of the raw, fiercely divided bickering clans of the Macedonian highlands. He realized with a jolt of stark clarity that the greatest, most monumental challenge he would face if he ever returned home wouldn't simply be training men how to hold a pike or march in step. It would be teaching them to love one another and their state more than they feared the enemy or hated their rivals. In Macedon, Philip said slowly, his voice dropping into a quiet, introspective register, "We fight entirely for our bloodlines, our households, and our individual clans. You are telling me that, if I want to save my kingdom, I have to somehow make the entire army my clan." Pelopidas reached out, bringing a heavy, calloused hand down firmly onto the young prince's shoulder with a reassuring thud. "If you manage to do that, Philip," Pelopidas declared, his voice ringing with absolute prophecy, "you will not just have a fragile kingdom that rises and falls with a king's breath. You will forge a force of nature that can march to the ends of the earth and reshape the world." The lion's cub had finally learned the hidden spiritual secret behind the invincible power of Thebes. Covenant of the Companions, 2330, Day 3, the olive grove of the Cadmea. The air in the ancient olive grove was cool, crisp, and heavy, with the dry scent of dust, withered grass, and ripening autumn fruit. Philip sat cross-legged in the center of a small, tight circle formed by his companions, the flickering golden light of a single bronze lantern, casting long, dancing shadows against the gnarled, twisted trunks of the trees. Beside him sat Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and Amyntor. They were not hiding in the shadows out of fear or plotting petty mischief. They were gathered here in solemn, deliberate imitation of the monumental greatness they had witnessed all week across the military academy. "I saw them again today during the afternoon maneuvers," Leonnatus whispered, his eyes wide with a lingering, visceral awe. "The sacred band. When they moved into the anastrophe wheel, it wasn't just a military drill. It was like watching a single, divine soul inhabit 300 separate bodies without a single hesitation. It's the absolute bond between them," Philip said, his voice low, steady, and resonant in the quiet grove. "Pelopidas told me in the baths that a man will always fight harder for the man he loves and trusts than for any crowned king." He wasn't just talking about romantic affection. He was explaining a mechanical, tactical engine. "He wants us to understand it from the inside out." Amyntor shifted slightly on the grass, his dark eyes reflecting the lantern flame. "They rely on each other so completely that failure isn't an option," Amyntor added quietly, his analytical mind processing the weight of the week's lessons. "If we want to survive our own court in Pella, we need that exact kind of armor." Philip reached down to his belt and produced a small silver-hilted utility dagger, a generous personal gift from Pamines. With a deliberate, measured movement, he placed a shallow bronze bowl filled with dark wine on the bare earth directly between them. "The Thebans have shown us their heart," Philip continued, sweeping his gaze across his four companions. "They don't treat us like captive prisoners, they treat us like honored students. But we cannot just stand by as passive spectators. We must become like them. If we are to return to Macedon one day and reclaim our inheritance, we must be as unbreakable as the men we admire." Antigonus nodded slowly, his face etched with a sudden, grave maturity. "We've always competed fiercely against each other back in Pella, my house against yours, Peithon's against mine, clan against clan in a constant blood feud. But here, when the Peithon tribes pushes us to the breaking point, I only keep standing because I see you four holding your ground." "Then let's make it official," Peithon suggested, leaning forward into the lantern light. "Not because some law or king commands it, but because we choose to bind our fates together." Philip made a small, clean prick on the pad of his thumb, letting a dark bead of blood fall into the crimson wine within the bronze bowl. Without a word, he passed the silver-hilted blade to Leonnatus. One by one, Leonnatus, Antigonus, Peithon, and Amyntor added their own blood to the cup. It wasn't an act of childish rebellion or treason against their hosts, but a sacred, deliberate mimicry of the Theban ideal. "From this night forward, we are the Hetairoi of the South," Philip declared, using the ancient, noble Macedonian term for royal companions. "We share everything. What I learned from Epaminondas and Pelopidas, I teach to you. What you overhear in the armory or the council rooms, you bring to me. We will protect the man to our left as if he were our own heart." Suddenly, the sharp, dry snap of a breaking twig echoed through the stillness. The five boys froze instantly, every muscle tensing. From the dense, dark shadows of the neighboring olive trees, a tall, broad-shouldered figure emerged into the flickering circle of the lantern light. It was General Pelopidas. He was unarmored, wearing only a simple dark wool tunic, and his hands were entirely empty of weapons. "A private symposium under the trees?" Pelopidas asked, a small, knowing, approving smile playing on the corners of his stern lips. Philip instantly stood up, his face flushing with a mixture of surprise and youthful pride, though his gaze remained fiercely steady. "We were swearing an oath, General," Philip admitted openly. "In the manner of your sacred band." Pelopidas walked slowly into the circle, stepping past the boys to look down at the shallow bronze bowl of mingled blood and wine resting on the earth. He didn't look angry or alarmed. He looked deeply satisfied, like an exacting master builder seeing a young apprentice finally grasp the core theorem of a complex architecture. "I wondered how long it would take for you northern wolves to stop acting like bitter rivals and start acting like a true phalanx," Pelopidas said softly. He reached out, bringing a heavy, calloused hand down to firmly squeeze Philip's shoulder, then Leonnatus's, then Antigonus's. "Do not hide this pact, Philip. A bond like this isn't a dark secret to be kept hidden in the dirt. It is a guiding light to be shown to the world. Tomorrow you will train together as a single, indivisible file in the pits. If you truly want to be like the sacred band, then show me you can breathe as one." As Pelopidas turned and walked back toward the silent residence through the cool night, the 5 young companions looked at one another with a profound, unshakable clarity. They were no longer just hostages waiting out their days in a foreign land. They were a singular unit, a proto-elite guard being forged in the absolute finest fire the Hellenic world had to offer. Lion and the wooden walls. The room was sparse, reflecting the ascetic nature of the man who occupied it. There were no gilded statues or purple tapestries. Instead, the walls were lined with maps of the Peloponnese, geometry slates, and detailed charts of the Aegean Sea. A single bronze lamp flickered on the heavy table between Pelopidas and Epaminondas. Outside, the autumn rain beat heavily against the narrow, high-set stone windows of the Cadmea, blurring the view of the Boeotian fields below. But inside, the 2 architects of Theban glory sat in an intense, calculating silence. Pelopidas leaned back, his massive frame dwarfing the simple wooden chair. He watched Epaminondas, who was meticulously cleaning a mathematical instrument, before turning his gaze back to a fresh dispatch scroll. "He surpassed the senior cadets in the tactical sand pit today," Pelopidas said, his voice a low rumble. The boy didn't just defend his position. He anticipated the flank and sacrificed his center to trap the Spartan reserve. "He's been here a month, and he's already thinking in 3 dimensions. Epaminondas looked up, his eyes calm but unnervingly sharp. "He doesn't just watch the drills, Pelopidas. He studies the pulse of the men. I found him yesterday by the armory, not looking at the swords but measuring the length of the transport wagons. He's calculating our reach." "It's what we wanted, isn't it?" Pelopidas asked, though a note of caution had entered his tone. "A Macedonian prince who speaks our language, who understands our phalanx. We are building a bridge to the north. A stable, Theban-aligned Pella is the shield we need while we finish the work in the south." Epaminondas stood and walked to a map of Hellas pinned to the wall. He placed a long, slender finger on the small, rugged patch labeled Macedonia. "There is a difference between building a bridge and sharpening a blade," Epaminondas mused. "Most hostages wither. They pine for their mothers or drown themselves in wine. But Philip Dot, he absorbs everything. He listens to the philosophers and applies their logic to the spear. He watches the sacred band and doesn't see a unit of elite soldiers. He sees a psychological engine." "You think we are teaching him too much," Pelopidas stated. It wasn't a question. "I think we are teaching a boy who has seen his own family slaughtered how to be the most efficient predator in Greece," Epaminondas replied softly. "Today, he asked me why we keep the left wing so deep. I gave him the standard answer: to crush the Spartan king. He looked at me, Pelopidas, with those gray winter eyes and said, 'No. You do it because you've turned the phalanx into a wedge. You aren't fighting a battle, you're performing a surgery.'" Pelopidas let out a short, sharp laugh, though it lacked its usual mirth. "By the gods. He's 13. He is an Argead," Epaminondas corrected. "They don't have childhoods, they have successions. If we teach him our secrets, we gamble that his gratitude will outweigh his ambition. But look at that land, Pelopidas. It is vast, timber-rich, and filled with men who know only how to fight. If a man ever unified those tribes with our tactics, Pelopidas stood, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Then we make sure he loves Thebes more than he hates his exile. Epaminondas treats him like a son. The boy is happy here. He is well-fed and well-schooled, Epaminondas agreed, turning back to his maps. But a lion in a garden is still a lion. We will continue the education. I cannot refuse a mind that hungry for the truth. But we must be careful, my friend. We are the ones who taught the world that a smaller, smarter force can topple a giant. Let us hope he doesn't learn that lesson too well. As Pelopidas walked toward the heavy oak door, it creaked open, and Ismenias stepped into the chamber. Fresh from the northern roads, Ismenias shook the heavy rain from his woolen cloak, his boots still splattered with black mud. Behind him, the trestle tables were strewn with papyrus scrolls, wax tablets, and fresh maritime intelligence. Epaminondas looked up, his focus instantly shifting from the training yards to the grander geopolitical board. You have returned safely, Ismenias. And you, Pelopidas, Susa has given us the legal mantle of hegemony, and Artaxerxes has signed away the Greek mainland to our will. But a decree written on Persian parchment is only as strong as the spears that back it, or in this case, the ships that carry it. Pelopidas unrolled a fresh scroll containing trade manifests and maritime intelligence from the Phoenician coast, tossing it onto the table. Susa is secure, Epaminondas, but the great king holds the sea. If we wish to truly hold the Hellenic world, we cannot merely command the land. Athens still sits upon her 100 triremes, laughing at our failings from behind her wooden walls. As long as the Piraeus controls the Aegean, Thebes remains a landlocked giant. Epaminondas nodded slowly, leaning his weight onto his hands. A landlocked giant. Exactly so. We are an agricultural people, Pelopidas. Our blood is bound to the rich soil of the Boeotian plains, to the wheat harvest and the olive groves of the Capes basin. Our fathers never raised a sail higher than a river barge on Lake Capes. The vast, shifting politics of the Aegean Sea are completely foreign to us, a dark, unknown venture where we have neither port shipwrights nor veteran sailors. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he looked across the table toward Ismenias. And yet, if Thebes is to truly surpass Athens and secure our hegemony against Spartan revanchism and Persian whim, that unknown venture must happen, Epaminondas continued, his voice dropping into an unyielding, visionary cadence. We must build a fleet. We must become masters of the sea. Ismenias stepped forward into the flickering circle of the bronze lamp, unrolling a smaller, blood-stained dispatch scroll across the center of the map table. His boots were still caked in the gray-black mud of the northern coast, and his woolen cloak bore the damp stain of sea spray. Epaminondas looked up, his deep-set eyes narrowing instantly. You have returned from the northern maritime theater, Ismenias. Report. Ismenias drew a sharp breath, his gaze sweeping over both Epaminondas and Pelopidas. If we are to speak of war on land or sea, my lords, we must look at what happened along the Macedonian coast at Halakakman. The joint operation with Iphicrates and his Athenian fleet was a masterpiece of cold, brutal calculation, and a terrifying preview of what our northern borders are becoming. Pelopidas leaned forward, resting his massive hands on the edge of the table, his face tight with grim focus. Halakakman. We knew the Athenian general had taken the field to crush Pausanias's pretender host, but the dispatches lacked the details of the clash. Tell us how Iphicrates broke them. The Athenian fleet arrived with a scale that took my breath away. My lords, Ismenias replied, his voice dropping to a tense, vivid register. It was a sight carved from epic poetry. Scores of massive triremes, their timber hulls gleaming with fresh pitch, their bronze rams cutting through the whitecaps, surged toward the rocky coastline in perfect, unbroken formation. Thousands of Athenian marines and rowers poured off the decks onto the shore, joining our own Theban Vanguard, the custodians, alongside a contingent of loyal Macedonian citizens. The entire shore was choked with bronze and steel as we formed a united host marched inland toward Halakakman. He pressed a callous finger against the map, tracing the narrow valley approach. Iphicrates didn't just march to meet Pausanias. He laid a trap, Ismenias continued, the memory of the carnage still sharp in his eyes. He used young Philip as the bait. They placed the prince out in a vulnerable forward sector, dangling him before Pausanias's advancing host like a prize to draw the pretender out of his defensive posture. Pelopidas frowned, a flicker of shock crossing his features. Using the boy as bait? Pausanias would have jumped at the chance to slaughter an Argead prince. He did, as Menias nodded grimly. Pausanias took the bait, charging forward with his entire front line broken open and overextended to gobble up the prize. But the moment they committed, Iphicrates sprung the trap. The massive Athenian infantry columns and our Theban shock units pivoted with mathematical precision, enveloping their flanks. And then the slaughter began. Ismenias swallowed hard, the silence in the Cadmea deepening. It was not a battle, my lords. It was an execution, Ismenias said, his voice hard as iron. The Athenian troops, armed with advanced, extended spears, formed an impenetrable wall of outreach. They impaled Pausanias' vanguard before the pretender's men could even raise their swords. They slaughtered them in the narrow defiles without losing a single Athenian man. When the dust cleared, the field was nothing but broken shields and butchered bodies. Pausanias' army was wiped from the earth in a total unyielding massacre. Pelopidas stared down at the map, his jaw tightening as the twin perils of sea and mountain pressed in upon them. So we are caught between two worlds. If we build a fleet to challenge Athens in the east, we leave our northern flank naked to Bardalus's iron. If we march north to crush the Dardanians, Athens will choke our commerce and starve our allies from the water. Epaminondas walked slowly to the window, watching the rain strike the stone fortifications of the Cadmea, casting a long, thin line of darkness against the wall. His expression remained calm, carved from absolute resolve. Then we shall do both, Epaminondas said quietly, turning back to face his commanders. We are agriculturalists, yes, but we are also Thebans. We learned to shatter the Spartan invincibility at Leuctra, when the entire world said it was impossible. We will build our ships in the shipyards of the Piraeus and our own allied coast. We will train our landsmen to pull oars as fiercely as they hold pikes. We will venture into the dark waters of the Aegean, and we will break the naval monopoly of Athens. The sea will learn our name, just as the land did. Pelopidas looked back at his lifelong friend, a faint, reassuring smile breaking through his tension. He's just a hostage, Epaminondas. One boy against the weight of the Boeotian League. So was Pelops, Epaminondas whispered to the quiet room. And he founded a dynasty that changed the world. Hunter's Cipher. 11:45 p.m., the guest house of Pamines, Thebes. In the flickering light of a low burning oil lamp, Philip sat hunched over a small writing desk. Outside, the night watch of the Cadmea patrolled with measured steps, their spear butts echoing against the stone. Because all mail leaving Thebes was subject to the eyes of the Theban polemarks. And potentially, the spies of the regent Ptolemy Philip had to describe the revolutionary tactics of Pelopidas through the only language his brother Perdiccas would understand, the language of the Macedonian hunt. He dipped his reed pen into the soot ink and began to write, his hand steady despite the weight of the secrets he was committing to the page. To my brother, the master of the hounds. I hope the mountain air in Aegae remains clear and that your scorpions are finding their mark in the brush. Here in the south, the great huntsman Pelopidas has shown me a new way to trap the boar that I believe we must adopt for our own forests. He speaks of a twofold strike. In the old days, we simply chased the beast until one of us tired. But Pelopidas suggests we use the Anvila solid line of beaters, who stand firm and unmoving, drawing the boar's attention and giving him a wall he cannot pass. While the beast is fixed upon the beaters, the hammer-mounted hunters must sweep wide and strike from the rear with absolute force. The secret, brother, is in the timing. The anvil must be strong enough to hold the weight, but it is the hammer that finishes the kill. If we can train our huntsmen to ride as one, we shall never lose another hound to the Illyrian tusks. I'm learning the geometry of the oblique approach as well, how to tilt the line so the beast is always lunging at shadows, while the heavy spears find his flank. Keep the foundry fires hot. I shall bring the measurements of the new levers when the season turns. Your loyal brother, Philip. Philip folded the papyrus and sealed it with a drop of red wax, pressing his ring into the cooling surface. To a casual reader, it was a letter about hunting dogs and wild boar. To Perdiccas, it was the blueprint for the Macedonian phalanx and the companion cavalry. He was describing a system where the infantry would pin the enemy in place, the anvil, while the heavy cavalry, the hammer, delivered the decisive blow. He handed the scroll to a trusted Macedonian groom, who was departing with the morning tide. The lion's cub had sent the kill code home. The blueprint for a new empire is traveling north. To be continued in episode 11, Miniature Sacred Band. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesia's Playlist. Volume 2, Hetairoi, the Sacred Band Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 2. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our Vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.